So welcome back. I just want to extend a very warm welcome to the ambassador of Malaysia, who joined us this afternoon. He couldn't make it in the morning, but he made it in the afternoon. And oh, here he is, Ambassador Shahrul Ikram. Thank you very much for coming and joining us here. Okay, I just have to see whom I did not introduce before. I think that is you, Karim Zaazou. Karim Zaazou. In spite of his rather exotic name, he's been living in Vienna ever since, born in Vienna actually, and his German is better than my English, if I may say so. He is an investment banker, or actually, he's in the investment business, and he deals with the consultancy between Austria and the Middle East countries. And then we also have Mr. Klaus Bauer-Mitterlehner, that is you. He's also from TPA Horwath. He is in charge of the CEE countries and also a co-partner for the Middle East with Mr. Weiss. And the others I had introduced before. So our topic now is Islamic banking and what is it good for Austrian companies? How can Austrian companies profit from Islamic banking? And I don't know who wants to take up this first, or the topic itself, and who wants to give a reasonable answer to the question, why would an Austrian company invest with an Islamic bank? You have to take a microphone. There are one or two here. One for us, yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you for this first question. From my point of view, an Islamic investment for an Austrian company could be favorable from 2 points. The first is it is another source of capital, especially equity capital, to finance projects which maybe in the we have now some kind of credit crunch, which maybe wouldn't be financed through conventional banking. This is the first point. The second point is that also for Austrian banks, it would be a nice product, I think, with the capital from GCC or from Malaysia, that they can offer for their clients also to finance some projects in Austria, and not only in Austria, because we know a lot of Austrian companies are active, very active in the CE region. So I mean, I think also in the CE it would be a benefit, more Islamic finance product to introduce. What do you mean, Klaus?
I think the important part here is we could play a hub. We could really play a hub to CEE. I mean, we have shown how good we are, what is our benefit, how really we can benefit to our clients, to the Austrian companies in CEE, and to play this hub for this region would definitely be a role I would highly appreciate.
If I understand you correctly, what you mean is getting companies from the CE countries interested in Islamic banking. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. I really believe that the credit crunch also affects Central Eastern Europe. So there is a need for alternative financing. And I think we have learned from the speakers before that Islamic finance is for sure one possibility. And I'm pretty sure that not only Austria, also Central Eastern countries would like to go for these alternative investments. And in a way, it has to be centralized. And I believe using one country And here Austria really believe could be definitely a good role to play this hub for all these countries.
Yeah, I would have phrased the whole question differently anyway after this wonderful presentations of mornings and afternoons. I wouldn't question why would Austrians get involved in Islamic banking. So why are they not going there? I mean, why haven't they done that long ago? I mean, I know it's not been established for that long a period, but they could have done it 5 years ago, 3 years ago, but there is very, very little interest. And I've been asking, where are the Austrian bankers here among the audience? And here is one. I appreciate your presence here. But I know that there are more banks in Austria than just one. So anyway, so I mean, when you said as a sort of transmission belt between the CE countries and let's say Malaysia or whatever, what I'm concerned about is that you may get these very ethical banking system that has been explained to us this morning involved into this rather messy atmosphere that exists in some of the CE countries and some of the CE companies.
I believe we from TP Horwath, we have no fear about these cultural differences. Yeah, I mean, we're working on this for many, many years. We did this for more than 15 years. We are aware that there are cultural differences, yeah, but we really believe together with our partners, and we have really strong partners here, this is manageable, yeah, it's doable, yeah, and there's a need for it.
I would like to know which other countries or companies from other countries would you know sort of by heart that are doing the kind of business that we are all talking about, which are sort of comparable to Austria? I mean, I don't want to know now the United States or Great Britain, but I would like to know Belgium or, you know, other smaller countries like Austria. I think it's on.
Transactions with...
let me see. Yeah, take this one.
Transactions with basically European companies have not been very frequent, but I have personally arranged a number of deals that involved a couple of German companies, medium-sized German companies. I have seen deals organized with British companies, with French companies, and I have not seen any problem in terms of structuring those deals and having them accepted and done actually successfully with these companies. You have raised a question which is very important. Why haven't we seen Islamic finance or Islamic finance deals done with the Austrian companies? I believe that the question is, or this is due to the fact that Austrian companies have probably been a little bit more conservative than the rest of their peers in Europe, and maybe shy about approaching banks outside Europe and outside Austria, maybe shy about approaching, you know, Islamic banks offering what may have been perceived as an exotic product. As long as they could manage their financials or their financing needs within Austria or within Europe, they did not feel the need to go beyond the borders in Austria or beyond the borders of Europe. But there is another factor.
Or go beyond the borders of the old Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, because that's where they have been. I mean,
Correct.
they have gone, they have traditionally been
traditionally.
there.
The other main factor, however, and we should not forget this one, is that there is none of the Austrian banks which has set up even a small department which says, okay, correspondent banking relations with Islamic banks. I'm not going all the way to saying, you know, setting up an Islamic banking division or window, but setting up even a specialized one-man or two-man team, man or lady team, to investigate, to develop relationship with Islamic banks and see how they can benefit or channel, say, benefits of Islamic finance into the Austrian market. So, in my opinion, if we want to develop Islamic finance, or say if we want to attract more Islamic finance to Austria, Austrian banks have to be a little bit more aggressive in approaching the Islamic finance markets. But more importantly, Austrian banks have to be the bridge effect between this financing world, which is called Islamic finance, and the corporate world of Austria. That is how I believe that this is going to happen. Because banks have not done it, in fact, TPA has seen this opportunity and is now trying basically to bridge this gap.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask Karim what he has to say about this.
Sometimes it was a little bit, of course, essentially the problem is that the Austrian banks are not present. Because I think the East European success story is partly because the Austrian banks have been very early in Eastern Europe, so it was like the corporations following their banks. And partly I had the feeling that even traveling with banks through the Middle East, that they are scared of the success. Because success means to build up operations, to set up teams, to open offices in weird places like Bahrain or Malaysia, far away, you know, going through a lot of effort. So they were a little bit shy of this, maybe doubling the story of Eastern Europe by coincidence in other areas. And of course then in this region you have a huge competition. Traditionally the British are very strong there, the French banks show have a very strong showing. Additionally, of course, the American banks and asset management companies. And then again, as said before, as long as the system here was kind of rolling, the need for additional sources was not really there. So why go through all the hassle? And maybe, to be very honest, I think even the name of Islamic finance, you know, why going through in a period where the region and maybe some prejudice about the religion, the name, the region were not very favorable, why look into it? Mm. We think now is a good time for both sides. And again, I think the attractive part for the Islamic industry, looking at Austria, could really be the hub to Eastern Europe. Because maybe even for the Islamic finance market growing at the moment, only Austria is rather a small place. With the exception, you try to do what Luxembourg is doing now. Luxembourg tries to position itself as financial harbor for the Islamic fund industry. They try to make it easy to set up Islamic funds one after the other, and by this gain acknowledgement and opportunities.
But it's also interesting when you look at the number of immigrants from Muslim countries into Austria, and when you look at how, I mean, there is not a high number, but a significant number of very successful representatives from Muslim countries here in Austria. And still there is not even a teller at one of the Austrian banks who could serve those according to their laws. And where do they go? They have to go to London or to Geneva, to Zurich.
Basically, this is not serviced at the moment. We had one attempt by Oberbank to open a Islamic kind of bank, side business. I think the problem is that it's not only about opening your regular salary account in an Islamic way. The question is what products are regularly available also on the investment side. Even talking to several banks, today you can buy Islamic products on a regular basis. You can buy indices from world stock indexes, from Dow Jones, S&P, MSCI. There are sukuks listed in various countries. Sure. But it's not really offered, and it's not really taken care of. So the effort has to come first from the banking side. Those who want it they are going currently, for example, Switzerland is very active in this market, and they're pushing it hard in two ways: to create products and create the services, like private banking for Islamic clients who want to have Islamic deposits.
I just need to add on answering the question of how best can the Austrian financial market enter into the Islamic space. Just taking the audience to 30,000 feet above. If we use the success story of Malaysia, success story of some of the countries in the GCC, every of these jurisdictions has a champion. You need a driver at the highest level. You need a champion at the highest level. And you need a placard bearer at the highest level to make sure that the passion, the drive, the initiative to create a comprehensive legal and regulatory framework, in this case, Austria, is being carried through. For example, the champion in Malaysia is the central bank itself. The central bank even go to the extent of providing seed capital to asset managers like us and bring in international 16 other asset managers to build track record. I think just in Europe, I could see the champion for Germany who is actually championing it. I could see Buffin is actually doing it.
Which one was that?
Buffin. Buffin is the regulatory authority for the capital market. In fact, the closest example in my experience to Austria is Germany. In the fund that I just launched, and the first day to manage with February 6 for my UCITS 4, one of the seed funder comes from Germany. They are investing into a fund that do not have a track record yet. And who is the champion in Bahrain? It's a central bank as well. So there has got to be a champion at the highest level in tandem with the political willpower. It is going to be very tough for TPAs and those at the players and the working level to push Islamic finance from bottom up. It's going to be very tough for the bank to actually initiate at the bottom up if the regulatory framework is actually not there to support them. So it has to be bottom up and top down. So there has got to be a concerted effort, and I strongly suggest the Austrian interested market players form a working group. With that working group, which comprised of market players, regulators, banks, asset managers, Price Waterhouse, and all those, they would be able to then bring a compelling case from the top to support, and the bottom will definitely just naturally follow through.
Okay, thank you very much. It just occurred to me something totally unrelated to the podium right now, but you will all receive an email with the presentations. So in case you want to take notes of everything we are saying, you can forget that. You will get from the Wirtschaftskammer, everyone who's attended, who has signed in, who's left his name and his email address here, will receive an email with all the presentations. I want to pick up on something that I think you mentioned in your presentation, and that was sort of a very brief mentioning of the German Bundesland of I think it was Saxonia-Anhalt, which invested into a Sukuk 5-year, or issue a Sukuk 5 years ago, or 2005, 4 even, yeah. How did this come about, and how, do you know anything about the background, what made them do that? Because that's about the size of, I mean, I have no idea, but Sachsen-Anhalt is probably a little smaller than Austria, but comparatively, does anyone know about?
I probably could start answering, and I think Karim probably know more of the background. Again, there was an individual in that state who was driving and championing that Islamic finance can also be a niche in Germany. And if you recall, the finance minister at that time was Christine Lagarde. Christine Lagarde...
But she was from France.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry.
Christine Lagarde was from France.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
wanted
okay.
to relate to France. I'll take that back.
Okay.
So this individual wanted to be the champion and wanted to drive Islamic finance to be in existence on a sustainable basis with the German sphere. But he also had relationship with the Middle East investors. So at the end of the day, having identified a Middle East investors, and here he is wanting to come up with a Islamic finance product, he marries it together, coming up with a sukuk in 2004. And there was a debate whether it should be a US dollar sukuk or a euro sukuk. There was no euro sukuk at all during that time. Most of the sukuk are in ringgit, as presented by Rushdund. At that time, ringgit contributes like 98% of the global sukuk. And it was a time to prove that a euro sukuk probably might materialize if it's properly supported. So it was the first and only sukuk that
in
is
Euro.
a euro, that not only in euro, but it was the first and only euro-based currency sukuk. When it was paid in 2008 by the Middle Eastern investors, clearly there was no support on a sukuk because of the currency against US. There was a lot more support towards flight to safety on US at that time. So there was no new euro currency-based sukuk except for the one which is the Exxon on hold.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you want to add on the background.
I think maybe one thing is interesting that this is one risk that Islamic investors would actually look for, sovereign risk in sort of. And it's one discussion that I have regularly with Mr. El-Kafsi, why on the sovereign side nobody issues sukuks in Europe, although that would be a risk looked for, and at the same time we have a lot of discussions about budget restrictions, especially in communities, cities, sovereign side. And the funny thing about Sachsen-Anhalt was that this sukuk was for the, they actually financed several office buildings for the Ministry of Finance of Sachsen-Anhalt. So it was for the purpose of setting up several new actual buildings for the Ministry of Finance. And it was very successfully, and I think the arranger, as you just said, was Citibank at that time. So it was an American bank with its Islamic department that arranged in Germany a Euro sukuk financed by Middle East investors.
Yeah.
So
Couldn't
you
get
see
more
the
complicated.
combination.
Yeah. I want to come back to the question of risk-taking, but I would like to ask you, since you are here from TPA Horwath, why would a tax expert, as you are, get involved in this kind of a question in Islamic finance?
The involvement of TPA Horwath was a little bit of a personal relationship in the beginning. I mean, I knew Mr. Zaazou, Karim Zaazou, through my kids. And the result was a trustful friendship over time, and then we started visiting the Middle East widely. At one of these visits, Karim introduced me to Mr. El-Kafsi. We started working together. We built up trust. We started with the first projects. And then we came up with the idea a couple of years ago, let's do something more specific. And then we, from this coincidence, it moved to a more strategic point. And that's why us in the first stage are involved in the subject. Besides this, of course, later on it was clear that we have now a cooperation of real experts. Mr. El-Kafsi, Ms. Kamso here on this side. We are, on our hand, have been a long time developed our skills in Central Eastern Europe, so we believe we can handle cultural differences. And besides this, I believe an audit and tax company, of course, is also needed here in addition. So as a team, we believe that it makes sense that TP Horwath, as a tax and audit company, joins this initiative.
I would like to ask you, Mr. Kafsi, what kind of impact does the euro crisis have on the question that we are all talking about now, on Islamic financing? Except for the numbers where we saw that the numbers were also going down a little bit, but what other kind of impact is there?
The euro crisis has not really impacted that much the Islamic banking sector for one very simple reason, which is that the Islamic banks level of, or the level of the Islamic banking portfolio in Europe is relatively limited. However, what I see much more of an opportunity now for the Islamic banking sector to make up for their absence in this part of the world over the past number of years, because there is now a meeting of interest, an obvious and practical meeting of interest. Islamic banks now are very liquid. When I say very liquid, I mean that they are sitting on a fairly large amount of liquidity, which they do not want to invest in, say, risky lending ventures, risky lending ventures. Instead, they would like to maintain that level of liquidity in a very liquid form and in very high quality assets. On the other hand, there are potentially borrowers here who would never have thought that they would be borrowing from the Islamic banking market, and who are of very high quality, and these days may need liquidity. And I believe that sukuk issues by these high quality borrowers, whether they are sovereign or private, would meet a fairly high level of success. So this is where I see right now, say, the crisis, if I may say, impacting at least positively Islamic financial institutions and the relationship between Islamic financial institutions and this part of the world.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when we look back like a year or maybe a year and a half ago, when we saw pictures from the Middle East, and I mean the Gulf countries, yeah, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and so on, what we saw were, you know, extreme development in terms of hotels and everything, and suddenly it stopped. I mean, it stopped sort of in mid-construction. How much has that impacted Islamic financing, or to look further into the future, has that picked up again? I mean, are they finishing the jobs now, or is that all on standstill?
It has obviously impacted most Islamic banks, because most Islamic banks had in their portfolio a certain level of exposure to, say, the Dubai or the Bahrain real estate sector. And it is for that reason that while they are firefighting these situations right now in terms of trying to implement remedial, say, actions to limit the level of damage, they are not taking any further, say, risks, hence the high level of liquidity, because the high level of liquidity to protect them from further surprises or from further deterioration of their portfolio. But yes, Islamic banks have been impacted quite severely by the real estate problems in the UAE and in Bahrain.
Mm-hmm. Is that the reason why, as you just said before, they are sitting on a lot of liquidity and not lending, I mean, not really giving money out?
That is one main reason. That is the main reason, in my opinion. But there are further, there are more reasons. If we look specifically at, for example, banks in Qatar, or if you look at banks in the UAE, these banks, some of them have been technically bailed out by their government, but at one condition, which is we want you to focus on your local markets. Focusing on local markets meant they have no other, say, possibilities to lend then to their own countries. And if they don't find the right opportunities, they would rather keep that liquidity, which they would like to invest on a quasi-money market basis or on highly rated borrowers, such as potentially, for example, good European, highly rated borrowers. So, I mean, there are a number of factors that we need to take into consideration when we try to see why is there such a level of liquidity, and why isn't it being invested locally, and why isn't it being lent normally. So,
okay. I need to apologize to Mrs. Kamso, but I don't really have, since Malaysia is such a success story, I don't really have any inquisitive questions to you, while on the other hand, for the region that Mr. Kafsi represents, there is so much more to talk about. Like recently, I mean, we've been reporting now for more than a year about the unrest in many of the Middle Eastern countries and many Arab countries. And another factor, exactly. And I just wonder, how much does that influence the stability and the growth factor of Islamic banking? And are there concerns that if that continues to dominate the headlines, that Islamic banking will suffer too?
This is, I mean, both a very interesting and very timely question, to be honest with you, because we have a combination of two factors here. First of all, it has affected the Islamic banks simply because whenever there is, say, political risks, there are issues as they relate to the quality of the portfolio, as they relate to deposits. But as far as this particular crisis is concerned, if you look at Egypt, if you look at Tunisia, if you look at Libya, if you look at Morocco, all these countries are ending up with, say, Islamic governments. Governments that are there that would not object, let me put it this way, to the development of Islamic finance. And this is exactly what we are witnessing in countries such as Tunisia, Egypt, and Morocco.
But only if they stabilize. I mean, unless there is, you know, if unrest continues, then nobody will be looking at these countries in terms of, should I invest, you know? Or should I even get money out of it?
In fact, I am talking about the development of these industries within these countries, within Tunisia, within Morocco, within Egypt. And these institutions, in turn, would, over a certain period of time, of course, attract more easily, say, Islamic deposit and Islamic capital from the wealthier parts of the world, whether they are the GCC or Malaysia. So in fact, there is a negative and a positive impact of the what is called the Arab Spring on Islamic finance. But in my own assessment, there is the positive, I would say, impact is more important because it is helping Islamic finance be promoted in countries where it was almost absent. And it is preparing a platform for, say, a larger flow of investments, of Islamic investments from countries such as the GCC countries.
Karim, do you want to add something? Because you have been there, you know, you've been there for many, many years, and you can judge the differences between now and then.
I think especially if it comes to the Arab Spring, there are definitely two sides to it. The regional side or country by country side, and of course the international aspect. The Arab Spring so far, whatever it is, political for the people there and outcome of election, economic-wise for countries like Egypt, it's been a disaster. there's no question with tourism figures down 70%, which is a major income on foreign currencies, and strikes going on every now and then, and no question. At the same time, of course, it might be an opportunity to release it of 30 years of a very restrictive regime. And as we have a topic, Islamic finance was not welcomed by the former regime. For whatever reason, it was simply not welcome. So they didn't hand out any licenses to Islamic banks. They tried to avoid it. They didn't like Islamic insurance companies to work actively. So if we only take it from this perspective, at least they get a fair chance now. Beside the political development, there could be a total different one. It's, I think, too early to predict. But internally, it gives more opportunities to a sector, and definitely it would help the sector because it creates new opportunities, new assets, new deals can be done, new transactions. So from this perspective, even Tunisia, Morocco, it just adds up for a strengthening financial industry. Nevertheless, the economic impact for these regions, of course, especially Egypt, which is, I think, the most complicated fact, because Libya still has oil and will have income, can be a standstill for quite a while going on. But again, for the Islamic financial industry, it is a window of opportunity to get a fair chance into these markets.
Okay, thank you. You've been such a good audience for the last 6 hours or more, and I want to keep it that way. But I also would like to get you more involved in this process. And so I wonder, the diehard, the hardcore who has remained here, I'm sure that that you have questions to this distinct audience here. So if you have something on your heart, please raise your hand, tell us who you are, and you will get the microphone, and we will all be able to listen to what you have to either say or to ask. But that, of course, only if you have questions. If everything seems resolved for you, then here is one. Kriegen schon das Mikrofon.
Thank you. My name is Stefan Peters from Go Business Development. I would have two questions. One for El Kafsi and one for Datuk Noripah. In the Islamic financing of working capital, what happens to bad receivables? In the case there is a customer that does not pay, what happens in the mechanism of the Islamic financing vehicle? And,
he will be forgiven.
And for Datuk Noripah, I would like your comment on an experience I made about 1.5 years ago when I asked my private portfolio investment manager to put some Malaysian sokuks into my portfolio. And the answer was, we need to go through a very complicated personal identification procedure with you to allow you to buy such a title. And because the ringgit is not so freely convertible in the international bank trading, the liquidity of that asset would not be the kind we would like to see in your portfolio. So maybe something changed in the meantime, but 1.5 or 2 years ago, that was the point.
Okay, thank you very much. Who wants? El Kafsi.
Yeah. Concerning the issue of the receivables and who takes the risk of the receivables, for example, under an istisna transaction, the structure of the deal calls for the borrower, who is in need of cash to actually complete a production cycle and deliver goods. The transaction calls for him to complete the production cycle, and deliver the goods, the bank takes, in fact, the performance risk on the customer. Generally speaking, prior to entering into this istisna contract, the customer of the bank has already a buyer. That buyer could theoretically open a letter of credit to purchase the goods that are being manufactured, or could be a buyer whose risk would have been analyzed and accepted by the bank potentially as a buyer. Therefore, I would say in the absolute majority of the istisna transaction, the risk of the ultimate payment is taken by the bank, because the bank would have accepted the performance risk on the manufacturing side on its client, and then accepted the payment risk of his client for the purchase price. In a istisna transaction as well, istisna transactions sometimes can be triggered by the ultimate buyer. So the ultimate buyer, who is the payment, the payment risk of the client, is the one who initiates the deal, okay? And then the bank likes the deal and knows that the manufacturer may need finance, and the manufacturer, in terms of performance risk, is known as being a good company. So they go ahead, and the deal then starts with the financing of the manufacturer. So that's
okay.
Thank you very much for that question. The question is the know your client process in investing in ringgit sukuk still in existence? I suppose 1.5 years ago, there are two ways to invest in ringgit sukuk. Number one is for you to invest to a ringgit sukuk fund registered in Malaysia, and number two, to invest directly in a sukuk as an institutional or high net worth individual. I would like to ask the question, your situation was in the first situation, was it? You wanted to invest in a ringgit sukuk fund. The answer is yes. As a non-resident, you have to fill in some forms to invest, but the request to fill in that form is not as onerous, complicated as, or more complicated and difficult as investing in a UCITS 4. It is actually a lot more flexible than even UCITS 4. And whether the question, the next question is whether it has changed now. No, that's the short answer. We still have to go through the process of know your client. And to extend that answer, if you're still interested to invest in sukuk, there is also quite an amount of sukuk fund now in Malaysia after 1.5 years in ringgit, and there are also global sukuk fund which we, CIMB Principal Islamic Asset Management, will be managing, and that is registered in the Emirates, for example. So if you're still interested in investing in sukuk, whether it's ringgit sukuk or dollar sukuk, we are happy to assist. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to come back to the main question, the reason why we're all sitting here, at least on that issue, and that's, you know, the Austrian company. Why would they get involved with, or is there any chance for an Austrian company to get some sort of Islamic financing? And if I understood the proceedings correctly and the morning correctly, one of the reasons why there is relatively little money is that there are a lot of very small companies in Austria, and there are very few big companies like the OMV and other companies that might get involved in this. Is that the practical reason why there is actually so little exchange between Austrian companies and our topic here? I'll
start the answer and hand over to Mr. Kafsi. If you talk about big sukuks, yes, this is definitely on a company level one of the reasons that most of the Austrian companies from their requirements are rather smaller. But at the same time, there are, like we heard today, several instruments like trade finance or mezzanine financing that can be applied for a lot lower amounts. So it doesn't have to be like we saw today, the sukuk issues of 125 million. It's not necessary. We have already had talks about mezzanine financing in the range of 5 million, 7 million, 8 million, for example, in the real estate sector, if possible. And of course, in trade finance, again, we speak about reasonable amounts that could be attractive for Austrian companies. And on a personal level, if we should assist and help and advise, I'd rather start with the smaller ones than go for the very big ones at the beginning. But at the same time, of course, there is a potential for larger deals in Austria, especially if you look at, as I said before, to the community sector, governmental sector, sovereign rights sector, and even for larger companies. So that we have the diversity, and I think even in the Islamic industry. But may you?
Smaller companies in Austria definitely can attract Islamic financing if they are of the quality that is bankable, if I may say. What has been happening again is the fact that there has been no communication, literally, between the companies on the one hand and the Islamic banks on one hand, and there has been no intermediation. And I'm saying there has been no intermediation because I have seen a lot of examples of smaller companies, the rest of Europe, mainly the UK, some in Italy, in fact, some even in the US, small companies that have managed to obtain Islamic finance because of the intermediation of banks in their own countries. This has not been the case here in Austria. But again, I would say that there is a very good chance, for example, for Austrian companies that are specifically in the export sector, and I would say that are in the export sector maybe to countries where the Islamic banks are more familiar with, to finance their production cycle, for example, using istisna and letting the Islamic banks have the receivables risk, okay, as being the receivables as being the source of the repayment. This is one approach where the credit risk of the Austrian company is not necessarily taken, but it is more the performance risk which is taken. But again, I mean, I would strongly recommend that intermediation through, an Austrian bank or through an Austrian specialized institution be the means to bridge this gap in order to attract more funding to the smaller companies in Austria. Talking about smaller companies is fine, but also we have not seen any large Austrian company come to the market for a sukuk issue or even for, say, a nice, good-sized syndication. We have not seen any Austrian government agency attempt to see if they can raise some funding and take advantage of this window of opportunity, as we say. In my opinion, in summary, I believe more communication is needed.
Okay.
And more entrepreneurial, basically, approaches are needed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just allow me to make a strategic comment on this excitement of coming up with corporate sukuk. There's a challenge if you start with a corporate sukuk in any jurisdiction. The biggest challenge is pricing. The biggest challenge is to price against a benchmark of the sukuk. So ideally, if you allow me to make a suggestion, the best to actually come up with an involvement by the Austrian, not Australian, but Austrian government is to come up with a sovereign sukuk first. The Austrian government come up with a government sukuk, which is a sovereign risk, and that sovereign sukuk will be used as a benchmark to support the pricing of the corporate sukuk, which has been suggested by Mr. Karim and Mr. Kafsi. If that is actually not prevailing, if the sovereign sukuk is not prevailing, you will not have buyers for your corporate sukuk. I am a portfolio manager. I would actually want to buy a sovereign sukuk and a quasi-sovereign sukuk first, before I buy the corporate sukuk from that jurisdiction. Because if not, I'm just not able to come up with the pricing.
I would take the conventional sukuk issue. I will take the conventional sukuk issue pricing as being my benchmark, because at the end of the day, you know, in the secondary market, people will not be differentiating between an Islamic issue and a conventional issue from the pricing perspective. Otherwise, it can be a bit of a problem. And the Austrian government has already in the market some conventional sukuk, some conventional bond out there. So from that perspective, the issue becomes a little less sensitive, if I may say.
Okay. Yeah, immer noch still sensitive, but maybe a little less sensitive. Okay, that's a nice ending, I think, to this part of the conversation.